Is it on? Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to the Bookmark. Today we're going to be doing our book review on The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So this book review is a non-spoiler book review, so if you haven't read the book, this is more for like whether I should read it or should not read it, rather than we're going into like the details about what goes on in the book. If you want us to do a book review regarding like the little details that happen throughout the book and kind of what we thought overall of the concepts that are talked about in the book, let us know in the comments below, either on our YouTube page or on our Instagram page or our Facebook page. We also have that too. So to get into it, so Madeline Miller's book, The Song of Achilles, has been like a really popular book on Book Talk, but something that like me and my friends are kind of like, oh, is it a book we should pick up? You know, a lot of people are talking about it on Book Talk, and is it really that great? So this is kind of like an overview of whether or not it is a good book for you or not. So the Song of Achilles is the story obviously about Achilles and his companion Patroclus, which are characters that Madeline Miller actually took from the Iliad, which, if you're not familiar with Greek literature or poetry, the Iliad is a story that was made in like a long time ago, and it like recounts the story of Achilles. So if you really like this book, or if you want to go back to the source material where Madeline Miller got her inspiration from, definitely go and check out the Iliad. I will say that the Iliad is a bit harder to read. I mean, it's obviously from like the sentence structures and everything are not what we're used to now. So I'm pretty sure, I think there is actually like a modern day speak one, or like they like translate it for you, kind of like those Shakespeare books where it's like easy to read Shakespeare. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to go check out the Iliad if you're not familiar with what's going on already in the story. You don't have to if that's not really what you want to do. If you really just want to read the book because you've just heard everyone talk about it, then go read the book. So yeah, so first of all, we're getting the story from the point of view of Patroclus. I assure you, none of this is spoiler or anything. We're just kind of talking about what you're going to get yourself into when you start reading this book. So it goes by the point of view of Patroclus, and he is like the main narrator of this book. So he is, which is kind of a little bit different because Patroclus is not the hero of the story, or he's not depicted as like a Greek hero, and you'll probably see throughout the book that is commonly mentioned is that he's not seen as a Greek hero. That is kind of like up to debate because in the Iliad, Patroclus is kind of portrayed a little bit differently. He's portrayed a little bit more daring and brave, whereas this Patroclus is like a little bit on like the softer side. He doesn't really want to like, he's not like a confrontational type of person, but that is also kind of up to debate depending on how you see Patroclus's actions throughout the book. But overall, we kind of get this narrative about this hero Achilles that, I mean, everyone knows. Like there's even a body part named after Achilles, which is like the Achilles tendon, which is the ligament above your heel, because of like the whole story of Achilles dying because his heel wasn't shielded and like there was a arrow that hit him there. Like that's just how the story goes. And if you didn't know that that's the story of Achilles and that's why we call it an Achilles tendon, well, now you know. That is the Achilles that is being referred to in this book. So he already has this like big persona, and it is often, I mean, like any common Greek story retelling or even classic Greek literature, there's always a prophecy, and that is what's being told through this book. There is a prophecy dealing with Achilles and about Achilles' death and possibly his future legacy. And so to kind of give a little bit context, but for Greek heroes, like, your legacy is everything, because you can, like, die yourself, like, mortally die, but you still live on because of your legacy, and the story is about you. So that's kind of like another prevailing theme that we see in this book, is just your legacy, your story. Like, does that outweigh your personal wants and needs when you're alive? That is what's kind of going on in this story. I know it's often portrayed as like this big romance novel. And it is. There's some romance involved. I won't say exactly where we're seeing the romance. But you can kind of guess about what's going on there. I will say that this book, if you're looking for more like romance novelish, it's not really in this book. It's a lot of the romance is like slow burn, like it happens over long periods of time. And I think like the first mentioning of like a romantic relationship doesn't actually happen until like several chapters in. So watch out if you're the type of person who likes romance right there, right away. Maybe not the best book for you, but I would still highly recommend reading it because it has a really nice like slow burn to it. I think what's also different about this book is that the romance portrayed in the book, it kind of brings on a lot of like different questions and contexts. And I mean, I'm like a big Greek history, Greek mythology fan. Like, I've been with it since like Rick Riordan books with The Lightning Thief. And after that, I was like the small child who was reading like Homer's Iliad and the story, or like the Odyssey. Like there's a like a children's version of the Odyssey where like they broke it, like they made it so that it was like easily digestible for kids, and it was like broken up into several parts, and I read all of them. So I basically read the Odyssey and didn't realize I did. But like I was like that type of person, and even though I knew like this story of Achilles before, and this is basically a retelling for me, I still almost felt like as if I didn't know the story. Like I felt as if, oh my gosh, like I didn't know that was gonna happen, or like that's so cool. Like, and every chapter kind of has you hanging on like, oh, what's gonna happen? And I think that's partially because this retelling is Madeline Miller's like interpretation of later scholars' interpretations of what is going on in the Iliad, especially in the relationship that Patroclus and Achilles have, which you will see that there's a ton of people debating about this. I know if they're lovers, if they're not, what's going on with them. Is it that we just don't realize, or we just don't understand like there's a more familial or more brotherly love between them, or is there something more but they can't say anything because in this time period being gay is not something accepted, which is kind of tossed around in the book too, and even in Greek history, like ancient Greek history as well, was that like there was context, there was like some instances of like male lovers, but you couldn't be like officially married to each other. So it's like people trying to figure out if that was socially acceptable or not, and whether or not like the like relationship that Achilles has with Patroclus was actually even able to happen, like within their, especially because considering the like the roles that Achilles and Patroclus have in their like society, it's as well, it's like, was that even acceptable for them to do or what? So there's going to be after, you know, when you read this book and afterwards and you're talking about it with friends and family, like there's going to be, maybe not friends and family, but there's gonna be that always like, you know, could it have been like, is it just Madeline Miller's like retelling, or is it like an interpretation? And I think that's the cool part about this book, is that there is a lot of literature, like a more scholarly literature that you can read in accompanying with this book, and you will kind of get like a much deeper understanding of what's going on, and a deeper understanding of the concepts that are going on in this book, because it adds a lot of context to, you know, is what the two of them, the way that these two characters interact with each other, are they, you know, are you over reading, are you over like simplifying their actions, or is there like something deeper going on? And that's what I personally liked about this book, was that there is a lot of, so because of Madeline Miller being open about like, oh, this is the sources that I use, and kind of like the prevailing thought, or not like a thought in the scholarly literature that kind of motivated her for this book. So, I mean, I personally like it as a historian because that's what I do. And I will look back at other people's work and see like, where did they get this material from? But it's nice to see that in literature, which, I mean, if you're like that too, that's great. If you're not, you honestly, so I even approached the book as if like I did not know anything about Greek history. I was kind of like a noob to it. I was like thinking constantly like, okay, how would I feel if I like did not know anything about Greek history? How would this feel? And how would I realize this? And there's enough context and enough like history to get through the book to understand what's going on in the book itself. It's just that if you want extras, because there's a lot of like, oh, who's Odysseus and who is that person and how are they important to this overall story and Achilles' story and what happens after Achilles, and like the point of Achilles' story, like what happens after that and what does that cause and all that. That's where I think this book does really well, that it offers enough details that if you wanted to get into them, you could. And you could also like interact with the scholarly work that has been done regarding this poem, because it's actually a poem. The Iliad's originally a poem. So I think that's what's pretty cool that Madeline Miller does for this book. And I will say that I am not particularly a person who likes romance. Like, I like romance to be a feature of a book, but I don't necessarily like it to be the whole genre of the book. So I typically try to steer away from romance novels, although with this channel, because a lot of romance novels, a lot of like with Colleen Hoover, especially on Book Talk, you know, I'm like trying to get into like, okay, let's read more and more. And if you're kind of like me, I think that the Song of Achilles is a good middle ground. Like, it's not too romantic where it's like, that's like overwhelmingly its whole theme, but it's also not like bland, like, I mean, bland as in like no romance whatsoever, that you read it and you're just like, I don't know if this relationship was platonic or if it was romantic somewhat or what. So like it has like a slow burn to it, and I think that slow burn to this relationship and to the context of the whole book itself adds like, it has you grapple with concepts that are a little bit more deep than like, oh, does he like me or does he not? I don't know. I felt like that this book, because of the way it had like a slow burn, it made you kind of think a lot about like your relationships and what constitutes like sacrifice and, you know, standing up for yourself, and like a lot of the tugs and pulls that happen in this relationship. And I think what's really telling is that there are several quotes from Patroclus that talk about like love hurting. And I don't think we get that a lot in current like contemporary romance novels. Like, we don't get a lot of love hurting so much. And even though like you may not be in a relationship that is looked down upon, like for example a homosexual relationship, you can kind of relate in that like love is gonna somewhat hurt. And if you're not in a relationship, then you can just like look at it and be like, oh, so is that what love looks like to some people? And then eventually when you get into a relationship, hopefully, depending on how your view of relationships is and how your journey is with that, maybe you might look back and say like, oh, the writing that was going on in this book really made sense with like love hurting because of the sacrifices and compromises that you have to do in order to say like, oh, at the end of the day, yes, I still want to be with this person. So I think that's why I personally like this book, because it's like the aspect of romance got you thinking a little bit more than just like I guess the typical like romance novels of like it being more like sexual desire, and it's more like a deeper level of romance. Although I will not lie, like there is like a little bit more like on the like superficial. Like there's a lot of Patroclus talks a lot about Achilles's facial features and his features in general and all that. So considering that, and this isn't a spoiler because this is like part of Achilles's like main character theme. It's like not just in the book, but he is half god. So he does have like a different aura. Like he looks, I don't know, he looks more, where more people would kind of look tired and be out of breath after a battle. Like Achilles looks like alive and fresh, and he always has like tan skinned and whatever. So that is still there. That's still an element in there. So don't think that like, oh, it's just because it's on a whole nother level that's why it's so much better than other romance novels. It's not. It's just like, I like that there's that like added depth to it. And I'm sure there's other romance novels that are out there that add that. And hope I'm not generalizing them so much that it's like, never read romance novels. I read a few. So, and if anyone knows of a few, like, please comment below, because I would like to get into romance novels and have a different perspective on them, especially because after reading The Song of Achilles, it's entirely like what people can do for romance novels, completely different. And I like that there's like this added historical aspect to it, which I'm sure other historian-esque people like me appreciate this book. And especially if you really liked like Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, or the Last Olympian series, or yeah, that is the Last Olympian series. And the other one I think is the Heroes of Olympus with like Jason and Piper and Leo. They like, if you like those books growing up, then you're definitely gonna like this, because it is basically a retelling of the stuff that happens. But I will say that what's different with Madeline Miller is that it doesn't bring in like ancient Greek history or like the mythology into modern day times. It still very much keeps it like in ancient history. So you will be reading about like Achilles and Patroclus and like all the main characters that come out of the Iliad and eventually in the Odyssey. You will be reading about them in their original context, like in their original time period. So there's no like modern day like shifting of characters. It's not like you're gonna get like a modern day Achilles or a modern day Patroclus, but in a way I feel like there's maybe some modern day interpretations that are put onto those characters and then retold with modern day interpretations that scholars have like been looking at since ancient Greek, or since like the Iliad had been published or disseminated. Not too sure how the Iliad was first told. I think it was first told through just normal everyday like verbal storytelling. I don't think it was printed till later. Someone correct me on that if I'm not correct. But yeah. So all in all, if you're still here at the end of this, it's probably a lot of talking, and now you're either like, okay, I don't want to read this anymore, or you're like, I really want to read this. I would say if you're on the fence, go ahead and try it out. It's a book that like, if you don't like, there's definitely one of your bookish friends that are gonna want to take it from you. Like they're gonna want to get it from you. So if you don't really like it at the end of the day, like there's a great ways to just like get it off your hands if you don't want it. If you love it, it's definitely going to be one of those books that you're going to keep thinking about, and you're eventually going to be like, oh, I want to read it again. Because I'm definitely the type of person that I don't like to reread books, because I start remembering how I first read them, and then that either comes like as really cringy if I was like younger, or it comes in as like, oh, I completely forgot about this. But sometimes I'm like, I have so many books in my to be read list that I cannot go back and reread books. But that book is like one of those books that I'm like, if I ever had time, it would be on one of my reread lists. Like, I want to reread this book because it was so good. And yeah, I would also say that like, if you're more of an audiobook fan, I read part of this like in book format and part of it in audiobook format, and the audiobook format is still really good for the storytelling aspect. Like I mean, obviously depends on which audiobook you use. I kind of just found one that's here on YouTube, just a video, an audiobook that was available on YouTube. But it's, you know, I was just kind of reading through it, and even though I was doing like small tasks here and there, I was still very much engaged in the book. So that's why I know that if you read it, like if you sat down and read it, it'd be one of those books that like you would just sit down and read for hours at a time. So that is a review of the Song of Achilles. If y'all have any questions or any more feedback or discussions, or maybe you have read the Song of Achilles and you want to like talk about it to the world because maybe you don't know anyone else who's read it and you want to spoil it, comment down below. Of course, if it's more of a spoil, oh my gosh. If it's more of like a spoil of the book, make sure you just put like spoilers and before people can like actually see the whole entire text. So just be aware of the people who have not read the book and want to hear more inputs down in the comments below. And I would love to hear your thoughts about the Song of Achilles. Maybe you haven't read the book and you've just seen this video and you want to comment like, oh, am I actually interested in this book or not? Like, should I do it? Yeah, right now, I know the book is really popular, but I'm pretty sure you can find it at most Barnes & Nobles have it. Every time that I go to Barnes & Noble, they've had like a few out in display. And it's typically like on the table with like BookTok books and everything. And I'm sure like other retailers have it too. I'm not too sure of like your typical Walmart because sometimes they have books. But I'm not even too sure about Target. Maybe some Targets do. I know my Target's a little bit smaller, but I would definitely say try out Barnes & Noble. And maybe even try out some of your more local bookstores because they're likely to have some of the more popular titles in stock as well. And yeah, so if y'all want to hear more book reviews, comment below, like this video, share the video, and make sure to check out our Instagram page, our Facebook, and check out those because those will actually have when we're going to be posting more book reviews. So yeah, thank you everyone.